Well, with this background, I don't know whether to cook you dinner, all right, or present to you. Anyone likes like coffee? Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Marc Howells. I'm the CEO of Goodbody Health. My career to date has been 37 years in financial services, or 38 years in financial services now, working across 11 different countries, building a number of different businesses. I've done 5 startups and taken them to sale level, and this is now my 6th business that I'm building for the future. Goodbody Health trades on AQSE. Its moniker is GDBY. We also trade on the OTC QB and the GDBYF. Surprisingly, we also trade electronically on AJ Bell. No surprise. In fact, Chris, I was at your stadium, AJ Bell in Manchester, watching Sale Sharks win with Invest Smart around, so I hope this meets that expectation. I'd like to have a slightly different direction through what I'm going to talk about today. I'd like to talk about blood, and I'd like to talk about genetics. We all have blood. We all have DNA. You can't live without it. Right, you can't survive without your blood and your health. And by my own experience of coming back to the UK from China and my own personal health experience, I understand some of the frustrations out in the market today with delays in the NHS, delays in the health service, and the frustrations involved, all right, with working through your own personal illness in the NHS. So, who are Goodbody Health? Well, we like to see that we're part of the revolution in the technology, the diagnostics, and the wellness and testing services we're bringing to the UK today. And we're part of that private revolution with the testing products, the diagnostic products, that we are bringing to the UK market through multiple points of care. We help consumers, we help pharmacies, we help GPs, we help private companies. We're working with the NHS, and with the increasing need they have for pathology, genetic testing, phlebotomy, and pharmacy consultations for those currently without symptoms, but to support the preventative health interventions and lifestyle changes to improve future health outcomes. Basically, what we work on is giving people the information to manage their health, manage their wellness before symptoms appear. And if you look at the paradigm that we live in the UK today, is you have your blood test checked when you feel that there's something wrong, rather than when you're healthy and understanding where your health and wellness is before symptoms appear. To give you some indications of where the market is on that, today there are 1.5 million people that are awaiting diagnosis within the NHS. And that's something which is growing quite rapidly today because of the delays with the stress that the NHS is under. My uncle, as a prime example, last week went into A&E. He spent 17 hours in A&E with no food or water before he was seen. He was diagnosed with diabetes 2. Right, and he had no food and water for 17 hours. That's the challenge that some people are experiencing within our wonderful NHS today. The interesting piece of information he gave me when he told me is that there were a lot of beds in the corridors, and they'd taken the wheels off the trolleys. And they're taking the wheels off the trolleys because then you're officially in a bed, you're not in a trolley, right? Even though you're in the aisles. So we know that our wonderful NHS is experiencing huge problems. So from the experience in financial services of managing large groups of people, my view was, how do we change the paradigm of how we operate in the UK with some other companies out there in working with people to test prior to any symptoms and helping them to know more and live better. If you know where your health is, if you know where your wellness is, if you know what you're predispositioned to, then you can do something about it before you enter the NHS. Goodbody Health started in 2017 I joined it in 2020. It started as a CBD company that was seed to consumer on developing CBD products in the UK with an extraction facility in Poland and a production facility in the UK. When I joined at the start of the pandemic, my view was to transition the business, and we transitioned the business into COVID testing and taking testing out through the pharmacies in the UK. That drove over £17 million of revenue in 2020 and enabled us to build a very strong war chest as we drive our strategy through from COVID testing to other wellness testing. Today we operate in over 235 pharmacies. We operate through dentists, we operate through opticians, we operate in multiple points of care where you can identify opportunities to test and establish people's wellness condition before you need to approach the NHS. And again, I'll stress our focus is on prevention and management prior to diagnosis and treatment, which is obviously where the NHS focus. It was announced today we just signed a contract with Alliance, which again significantly increases our footprint right in the UK market. We operate through Superdrug today. We're operating over 52 different types of tests in the market, and those tests vary from full venous draws to that enable you to do well man, well woman testing, which gives you a full blood analysis, to cancer checks that we're operating through saliva checks today, which measure your predisposition to certain cancers. And then following that, you can run separate blood tests. We operate a GP referral service. So we now have a national network where within 30 minutes you can talk and consult with the GP. Whereas if you look at Wembley, I live just outside Wembley today, tried to contact my doctor last week to make an appointment through patient access. No appointments being allowed through patient access. I called the doctor, the next appointment was over 5 weeks away. Right. So that's the current situation we're dealing with the NHS, and this enables you to not bypass but focus predominantly on prevention and understanding where you are prior to approaching the NHS. I've developed a national network of phlebotomy services. So again, within the NHS sector, it can take up to 5 weeks, if you're lucky, to get blood tests and get blood results back. Through the phlebotomy services that we're offering, that can be a same-day service. And bringing in the technology that we are pushing in the market, the old paradigm of going to your doctor to get a blood test, send it off to the lab, wait for the results to come back, which can be quite a lengthy process, we can do on site within several minutes. So the majority of the tests that currently take that time through the technology that's evolving today and is in place today, we can do tests in a point of care within several minutes and then link the person direct with a GP for a consultation within 30 minutes. So how we're moving that forward, I talked earlier the necessity for blood tests. If you look at the UK, we MOT our car. Once it's 3 years old, we MOT our car every year. Right? We MOT our boiler or service our boiler every year. You go to the dentist twice a year. How often do you check your blood? Only when you feel something is wrong. Right? Why do people not check their blood on a regular basis? Right? And again, that's what we're bringing through and are now in future testing, not only checking your blood on a regular basis, but also checking your predisposition to certain diseases through a lot of points of care through the UK. Our performance has improved significantly, right, over the last 2 years. We've conducted now over 300,000 tests in the market in the UK. That's growing on a daily basis, and it's also now extending into the genetic tests, which is testing not just for your predisposition for cancers and for certain illnesses, but also for what's called pharmacogenomics, which is your ability to utilize medicines and how you process medicines. So the same group of people can take the same medicine and different people react different ways to that medicine. Stop and prevent, right? Using the diagnostics through the points of care that we currently operate in, getting close now to 300 points of care. There are 12,000 pharmacies in the UK, 6,500 dentists in the UK, around 6,000 optometrists in the UK. These all fall outside the NHS testing, and the the non-NHS blood testing so far this year is around £60 million worth of non-NHS blood testing. By providing those facilities right throughout the UK through all those points of care and utilising the professionalism of the pharmacies, the dentists and the optometrists, again, enable us to get more information so that people can manage their health and wellness over time. If you look at diagnostics today, I mentioned earlier the challenges that the NHS are facing. If you look at, for example, liver and lung cancers, your survival rate, right, is half, right, is twice if it's discovered at stage 1 or pre-stage 1 than it is if it's discovered when the symptoms start to accelerate and it's discovered at stage 3 or 4. So the actual statistics are that 95% recover and survive if it's found at stage 1, right? 28%, right, survive and recover if it's found in stages 3 and 4. Statistically, 1 in 6 men have prostate cancer. Statistically, 1 in 6 men. So a number of people in here, without sounding all doom and gloom, a number of people in here may be part of that statistic. Do you know who it is? Okay, so I had prostate cancer in 2010, and it was found because I did a medical in China, which you had to for a license, for a business license to work in China. I came back to the UK, right, had the appropriate surgery and 2 courses of radiotherapy. If it was 5, and I had no symptoms. Right? If that was 5 years later, it would have probably killed me. Right? So you wait for symptoms, right? And the treatment is far more extensive and your survival rate is a lot lower, rather than when you test as a natural part of your day-to-day activity, your survival rates are significantly different. So now in the future, right? What happens now is, as I talked about, there's the delays, right, and the stress within the NHS. What Goodbody Health brings is the opportunity for people to test themselves before, as part of the regular activity, right, to prevent moving through the NHS backlog. So how do you prevent illness? Right? Testing doesn't mean you prevent illness. So how do you prevent it? Well, you test on a regular basis to start with, and then when you test, you can modify and change your lifestyle accordingly. So the 5 million people today that, according to the NHS data, are moving gradually towards diabetes 2 because of the sedentary lifestyle and the eating habits within the UK today, being able to gamify, as we do, through applications of helping people and encouraging people, motivating people, how they change their lifestyle to bring their risk of diabetes 2 to a more manageable level, is how we're trying to change the paradigm, right, within the UK. All right. And there are simple changes you can make in your lifestyle to enable you to avoid some of these risks and moving into the NHS backlog. The genetic testing we're doing is another example of that. So the genetic tests may identify risk for breast cancer or prostate cancer or a number of other different cancers. It may not stop you getting it, but if you're at high risk for prostate cancer, what you can do is set up a routine of regular PSA testing. So at the first point where you start to see any change or start to see any mutation, then you can refer into the NHS with the appropriate results. So you bypass the delays, the 18-week delays, right, on that diagnosis. And that's where we're seeing the acceleration move through the business. So what's my vision? Right, where I've tried to explain, my vision is very simple. It's not complicated. And that is to get everyone in the UK to have one genetic test. You only have to do it once, right? Your genes don't change. You have them for life. So you do one full genetic test, right? From that, I can map out your predisposition for cancers. So we can put blood tests in on a regular basis to see what changes on that, right? And therefore, I want to do 2 blood tests a year on every individual. So now we can help you manage your health over time on a subscription model, which is where it's building, right? To enable you to prevent moving into NHS backlogs and to take a lot of the pressure and stress off the NHS. We're supporting the overstretched NHS. I've probably said a few negative words about the NHS, but what country has such a magnificent NHS as we do? The fact is they're overstretched and under-resourced. Right? Today, 1 in 6 people are over 65. Right? By 2050, 1 in 4 people will be over 65, with less doctors, right? And less community services. Right? So part of developing the phlebotomy network, part of developing the technology enables us to deliver, which we're testing with the NHS, what's called virtual wards, where we're taking people out of hospital beds, putting them back into the home and enabling the test back at home so they don't have to take up a hospital bed. Right? And the technology that is revolutionizing the market and what we're doing is to take the stress off the NHS and enable it to be managed more locally through the services that we can provide. So, why invest in us? Well, it's a growing market, right? I think it's clear to everybody that the NHS is not going to solve itself, and throwing more money at it will not necessarily solve it when the NHS are fully exposed and stressed on diagnostics and treatment. Right? So that's where I'm talking about Goodbody fills the gap or enables a gap by looking at the preventative side and how you can work through the multiple points of care, doctors, dentists, pharmacies, business to business, as we're operating through a number of companies, right, to help people manage their health, right, to avoid moving into the NHS. I won't go through all of those numbers because you can read them yourselves. We have a proven track record of building businesses, right, and we already have established quite a large database of over 300,000, which not like my colleagues' presentations here with a big business, but it's growing rapidly, and that's accelerating over time. We're an established brand in the UK, right, and we have a strong distribution network. Not many companies have built up a distribution network of close to 300 points of care as quickly as we have, and again, that continues to accelerate. And our journey is not transactional. It's not one-off tests. As I talked about earlier, it's setting up regular testing with individuals on a subscription model where you're helping them manage their wellness over time. So that's what Goodbody Health is, right? I'm sorry I didn't make you dinner, all right? But we are in a hugely exciting market. I'm determined, and the business is determined, and the shareholders are determined, right, to help support the NHS by changing the paradigm in the UK. Get a genetic test, right? Take 2 blood tests a year, right? And your management of your own health, right, is what will fix the NHS, not the government throwing more money at it. Okay, happy for questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the floor, please? This lady here, Peter. Please.
Right, oh, it's at the time, I better go.
Hello. Do you have your own laboratories and your technicians and scientists? How about false negative and false positive results in your tests?
Okay, so going through those, do we have our own laboratories? No. We use independent accredited laboratories with the appropriate ISO qualifications. So we use London Medical Labs, we use Eurofins, and Eurofins is a multinational company, and we use Everything Genetics. Right? They are monitored on a regular basis to look at the false negatives, right? And where there are any concerns with regard to the checks, they're rerun. I'll give you a prime example on that. If you look at venous draw tests, there are, I would say, very, very small percentages on a full venous draw blood test for false positives, false negatives. If you look at a finger prick test, right, they are hugely problematic. Right? There are 10 to 20% of issues with the finger prick test. Hence the reason, if you want to do a home test just to check yourself, that's great, but a lot of people can't get enough blood out, and that normally results in a problem. So that's where we've started to have the finger prick test there, but also build the phlebotomy network where you can get the full venous draw, where you can do more extensive testing and double testing, and also the genetic test as well. So if you're doing the blood test and the genetic test, you can cross-reference.
So you've told us about the size of the market,
Yep.
which looks very impressive and says, gosh, there must be a lot of competitors
Yep.
equally interested in that market. 5 years ago, you were a CBD distributor. So you're not a technology business, you're a sort of marketing and distribution and business with executive business building experience. So where's the moat? What stops you someone nicking your executives and then moving in and replicating what you do and having deeper pockets and putting you out of business?
Well, let me try and break that down. Firstly, most of my executives have skin in the game with the company, right? So they're locked in, right? And that'll continue as the business builds. Is there competition in the market? Yes, there is, but in different parts of the market. And each individual competitor has its strengths and weaknesses. I worked in financial services. There's nothing probably more competitive than financial services. So you find your niche positions and you find your marketable position. What we've looked at is all of the key points right from the initial consultation with a customer all of the way through to the GP consultation and triage and referral after that, subject to what the result is, and manage that whole journey. And that journey then extends to subscription services where they can have regular tests all the way through the year, dependent on what their original concern was, and we gamify it with an app. So you can see on your phone how you're performing and how that's varying over time. So we've looked at all of the elements that the competition are doing, as you would do in any other business, and say, well, how are we going to compete against that, but make it a whole journey rather than just individual parts of it. And an example of that is there are some competitors who have been operating since the early 2000s on the finger prick test, right? But if you look at the performance, not a lot of them are making high revenues because of the failure rates and because of the finger prick itself. So you look at, well, how do you add on to that to add on all of those services? The other piece is the distribution points, right? So you look at, do you operate these purely as home tests, or do you operate them through professionals that can counsel and consult the customer or patient at that time? And that's why we chose to operate through the pharmacy network. As you know, the pharmacy network, 95% of their revenue comes from the NHS, right? This is an opportunity of generating private revenue by consulting with the individual what tests they need and what tests they should take. And I'll use a prime example of that. One of the bugbears I have is the number of people that buy iron tests and Floridix, etc. And my wife, who spends a fortune each month on multivitamins and Well Woman, etc. And I said, well, why do you take those? And she goes, well, everyone needs multivitamins. I said, well, how do you know? Right? And I was in a pharmacy the other day, and a lady came in and goes up to the pharmacist that I've just been speaking to and says, do you sell these iron tablets? The pharmacist says yes, right, and gives the lady the iron tablets, right? And I said, can I speak to the lady? Yes, of course you can. Why are you taking these? Well, I feel tired all the time, right? And of course, if you feel tired all the time, what you need to do is take iron tablets. I said, well, how do you know that's making you feel tired? How do you know that's what the problem is? I've got a device here, it's called an Abbott Affinion device. Why don't we test you, right? It costs £49. Let's test you and we'll tell you whether that's what you need or not, and you'll get the results in several minutes. She didn't need vitamin D. Sorry, I got that wrong. She didn't need iron tablets, she needed vitamin D tablets, and the pharmacist gave her the vitamin D tablets. Right? So this is where all of these things, come together. I want, when I grew up, the pharmacist was the centre of the community. They're not today, right? And there are 12,500 of them out there, right?
Okay. Can I just ask a question? You say it's a subscription model.
Yep.
So how much is a subscription?
It changes for each individual.
Depending on...
So it can vary from £19.99, up to, over £100, dependent on what they need to test and how regular.
But how do they know what they need?
Because they've completed the initial test.
Okay, and that determines how much they need to spend on a subscription in terms of how many different tests they need.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah. And whether they're doing it for the family or the individual.
That ties up very well with that question. Okay, so the process, the presentation speaks to me more as a consumer rather than an investor. So I like all this. If I want to participate, do I become a subscriber? Do I subscribe, or subscriber, thank you, or what? Explain, please.
Well, thanks for that feedback. My attempt at the presentation was to cover both, right? But, firstly, for every individual in this room, if you're not testing yourself, then do so. So become, right, a consumer. You can go on my website, let me know, and I'll give you a discount, right? Because you're here tonight. But as an investor, we are. How do I phrase this? We have strong liquidity because of the revenue we built up through COVID. So I'm not here asking for funding to continue this journey. The business is growing. What I am saying is that our industry, our Goodbody business, right, should continue to be invested in from independent investors like yourself, because where the overall business is going to go.
So if I invest, do I become ipso facto a subscriber, or is that separate?
No, that's separate. The subscription is the consumer.
Yeah.
Right. As a consumer, you're paying me for the test.
You're paying him. You're investing in the company, aren't you? Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
The investment.
So you're doing both.
Interesting. I wonder, there is NHS on one side, you split clearly the role, but don't you think maybe the NHS should have a more prevention strategy? Because in big scale, certainly for the government, for the NHS, it's more convenient to prevent rather than have to pay
this is
much higher amount of money later on.
This may be somewhat counterintuitive to what the goal is here tonight, but my sort of dream would be that when a baby is born and they do the finger prick, they do the heel test, then they do a genetic test at the same time. And then you can map out through the rest of that baby's life what they're predispositioned, right, to be. Now, that would still enable me on the sort of blood side to continue that, and that's going to be a generation, away before they do that. But I don't see why the NHS are not progressing the genetic testing, and certainly I just mentioned very briefly the pharmacogenetics, and I mentioned you could give people the same medicine and they all react differently. It depends on your genetic code and the way you metabolize it, etc. So you look at antidepressants. Antidepressants is a prime example. 38% of people, right? Antidepressants are only effective on 38% of the people that are prescribed on the first one. And the NHS follow a trial and error approach on how they do that. 8% of hospital administrations are because of adverse drug reactions of people that are being given the wrong medication, right? And hospital beds are full, right? So you give someone a genetic test looking at what their genetic disposition is for certain medications, and you can match the gene against the medication and say, sertraline will not work here, but diazepam or whatever it may be will work in this case, right? People over 65, the huge increase of multiple medications on the older generation, and the experts at this stage without a genetic test do not know how the multiple tablets that people are on. My brother's got MS and he takes 50 tablets, right? 50 tablets for MS. And when you say to him, how do they interact? No one knows. So they're constantly changing things around. Well, do a genetic test and then you can see, how it works. So again, in some of the testing that we're doing with, and I'm talking to a community diagnostic centre tomorrow about putting in the genetic tests. My view is that in the future, with what we're going to bring to the party, is that everybody should have a genetic test if they haven't already had one before you're prescribed any medicine, right? And
don't you think the private insurer may be interested in this?
Well, I'm talking to them, yeah, and I'm talking to insurance companies.
Thank you.
About how even gym memberships, we've signed up a gym membership, and we're talking to insurance companies, life insurance companies, etc., about how premiums can be adjusted subject to your blood test and your genetic test. The challenge that has with the NHS is this is all private money today, and how do you make sure you have the inequality covered, when you're dealing with the private money. And again, there's discussions going on about how in the more challenged, populations, that can be managed by the NHS. Right?
Great. Okay. Thank you very much, Marc, for your presentation this evening. Brilliant.